What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy, and today we're going to have a very special full-length interview. But if you're new to the podcast, we kind of have shows within the show. So obviously, we have full-length interviews like a traditional podcast would. We also have rants where I kind of go on and vent or discuss some hot topics within the industry or some things that I think need to just be said out there for everybody who's listening. And then also mental minutes, those quick mental game hacks to help you stay in the zone, whether that's mentally in the zone, physically in the zone, or maybe as a coach, you're looking at particular types of zones of training or skill acquisition. And then we also go into deep dives of more research papers and things that are going to be a little bit more into the nitty gritty, getting a little bit more scientific there. But if you have any future questions or topics that you want covered, you can text that in the show notes or email that in the zone podcast 123 at Gmail. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and introduce Jeremy Koenig. He's has his own podcast itself, which again you guys can check out below. But welcome on. So happy to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, obviously we connected through kind of more of a mutual podcast platform, but I saw your profile and I was like, oh man, this right here is a rabbit hole that I haven't quite gone down yet as far as how, but it all makes sense as far as the DNA insights and um kind of share your story on how you put yourself into that, I guess, zone of, human performance and biology.
Yeah, you got it. Well, it's fitting that Eric would introduce us. He's got a good sense in, I think, connecting people and love what you do here at in the zone. And look, I'm not a baseball player today. But you know what? Ever since I can remember, I wanted to be one.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean that was I was actually going through like um just in terms of there's a lot of let's just say empowerment that comes from writing your own script in life, right? And being proactive on that. And I check in with that from time to time. And here's where I am today. Here's where I want to go. But I look back at the very, very beginning, and one of the most spectacular moments of my life that I could remember was hitting a game-winning home run when I was like, I think I'm 11 or 12 years old, right?
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I grew up in Toronto. And I was in organized ball. I actually joined late because we couldn't afford it. And I was actually that guy that in your neighborhood that would run around, early morning, like Saturdays, like 6 a.m., knocking on doors. Parents hated me to rally the kids to play in the local cul-de-sac.
Oh
Which,
yeah.
by the way, my legacy in that cul-de-sac in Acacia Court is there's clear and prominent signs that say no ball playing in these courts.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah. But we played with tennis balls, right? And you played Burby as well. I don't know if they call it that where you are, basically wall ball, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You
So
know, yeah. So I developed an arm with tennis balls, and then at age I guess 12, we finally kind of scraped enough money together, and I went to one of these trial camps, and lo and behold, I made the team. They're like, "Where the hell did this guy come from?" It was like sandlot ball, man. Like that was it.
yeah, I love it.
The thing was like I could throw, I could catch, I could run. So they played me, and man, I love to play. So I pitched, and on my off days, I was either on third base or center field. And you can imagine what that's going to do to a developing arm when, well, you're throwing baseballs, man, like you're throwing major league
Sure.
ball, right? So by the time I was like, I don't know, 15 is when it happened. It's like I just couldn't pull the full range in my arm, right?
Mm.
It was just like all of a sudden everything just became like,
Stuck. Yeah.
yeah. And so I didn't know what that was. It was I was kind of saddened by it because I was in like the whole kind of Blue Jay camp identifiers and some stuff went on at home as well, which just wasn't conducive to let's just say a nurturing environment. So that was kind of my exit from baseball. I learned later that it was a slap tear.
Hmm. Okay.
And, you know, Actually, I've had it fixed. So who knows? Maybe I'll come on in one of these like Field of Dreams type moments, or
There
like
you go. Yeah, the
oldest
rookie coming back.
the oldest rookie. Yeah, it's like, here's my deal is like I come in, I only close, and I throw 9 pitches, 9 strikes. Like, wouldn't that be the dream? That would be my dream anyway.
9 pitches, 9 strikes each inning, and
Oh,
there's
yeah.
your
And
there's
that's it.
your outs for you. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so baseball was was my first love. But but shortly after I left baseball, there was some stuff with my mom and her health. And I kind of got interested in the intersection DNA and human health and performance. So I studied molecular biology, biochemistry, learned, first principles, really more like the philosophy of biology and evolution from my supervisor, Dr. Ford Doolittle, who is notorious for deconstructing Darwin's tree of life. He actually won the Canadian Herzberg Medal, which is basically like the Nobel for Canada.
Yeah,
So
right. That's
really, yeah, really well-renowned scientist, critical thinker, philosopher, but he got me really thinking. And it was great because I was, thinking about big concepts in terms of how life happens, evolutionary process, adaptation, optimization, getting in the zone, right? And
it. Yeah, love it.
yeah. And so, it was like I got these big principles, but I would like kind of shape them over to human performance because I was always like active in sports. So like once baseball was done, turned out it actually didn't hurt to throw overhand rights or uppercuts. So I actually competed at boxing for a while.
Yeah.
Um, before university, I shut that down though. Like I competed amateur. There were discussions about going pro, but you know what? Boxing didn't really help with my genetics homework, especially when you're like sparring with guys like twice your age, weight, and experience. Like that's how you get good and dominate in your field. But
Sure.
um, like heading a soccer ball, even though it's not like a full-blown hit, but like 100 times in a session, that's just not going to carry over well. So when I went to university, I was looking for something, to occupy that kind of need to move, if you will. I was like, what's socially acceptable to spend 20 to 30, 40 hours a week on? Didn't want to do the weight room stuff. So I actually took up track and field and sprinting. And so basically zero room for error in sprinting. So you can start to see how I'm starting to marry these principles of molecular biology, genetics with sprinting. And, I was a walk-on in college. And when I first started, I was ranked like 700th in the country in the 60 meters, which is not good. I mean, it's not bad because everybody runs it, right?
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
so, there's like thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people that run it. But I met a great coach, and wouldn't you know, within 3 months of training with him, I went from being ranked 700th to seventh in the country. Um, I know, like, talk about getting in the zone. And the to me, it just really kind of lights went off where it's like, wow, like to realize your potential, like yes, your DNA matters, your genetics matter, the environment where you're placed matters, but then it's like, kind of the culture, of and so the behavior, and hope, and so that's training, right? Like what kind of behavior do you um implement in such a way that your character is formed over time. We are what we repeatedly do. So therefore, character is a habit. So if you're doing the wrong things, like go back to baseball, overuse, probably incorrect or suboptimal technique, you're going to break. Whereas with sprinting, this was a thing that I couldn't understand. It was like my training got cut down to like a third of what I thought I needed. Everything was about me, my body type. I had an incredible coach that could just see things that others couldn't and could communicate them to me in such a way that I actually listened. Um, so anyway, I'm kind of talking through the journey here of athletics and genetics, as because all through university I was doing this athletic things. And in fact, after I finished my PhD and I did my postdoc at Cornell, the only reason I really went there was because the track coach invited me to train there. So I got to be this like pseudo athlete as I was pursuing this genetics thing. And although I was a professor for a couple of years, molecular biology, I actually chaired the department for the time that I was there. I got an interesting offer from the industry, specifically focused on studying, um, performance genetics, but specifically in the form of longevity and fertility. So I developed some assays and screens based on some studies we did with mice where we selectively bred them so that they could double reproductive lifespan. It'd be like humans having babies until they're 120. And that my job was like to figure out the genetics of that. And I just never really looked at DNA through that kind of applied lens. Because remember, I was always very philosophical. Here's how evolution works. And I'm like, oh wow, here's how you can actually steer it in towards specific outcomes. So I did that for a couple of years, but then started my own company, and I worked with basically athletes. I call it kind of the 10,000 athletes project. We looked into the DNA of 10,000 athletes, worked very, very closely with around 1,000 of them, and developed, essentially this way of looking at human performance genes that is actually going to be informative and help athletes, for example, decrease injury risk, right? I've got a lot of experience there. Um, Find the minimum effective dose with training. I learned that also with sprinting. And then the third thing was, how do you ensure the ready state? Taking a
Yeah.
page, Kelly Starrett's book, right? How do you avoid burnout? And that's like largely nutrition and metabolism. And the reality is we're all wearing different bodies. Um, and so, now with DNA, we can get a lens into that. But of course, it's not just DNA on its own. It's where in the world is that DNA from an environmental side of things. And then again, what are you doing behaviorally to activate it? So, kind of full circle, this journey from baseball to human performance DNA has led me to, look at the world in kind of these three overlapping circles, Venn diagram, whereas DNA is environment, and then there's behavior. And then it's like, how do you tweak those things in accordance with your goal to unlock potential? Because that's really what we're talking about is the human potential is amazing. I mean, I'm not sure if I did I write about that. Um, Maybe I
No,
did.
you're spot on about that. And I love the fact that you brought out the environment because, me in particular, when it comes to coaching, or maybe sometimes scientists can get a little too much of a microscopic view of just looking at the one thing and not thinking about, the socio-cultural things that might be impacting, or, obviously one thing affects everything. So it's never just the one thing, but, you can kind of have too narrow of a focus and miss out on the big picture, like you said, which I think is awesome that you brought that up. But yeah, no, this is all very, very interesting. And I'm got some more questions in the back of my head ready for you, but please continue.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like, interrupt me at any time because this is the thing is with the academic experience, I can be full of hot air and just talk forever. So just rip into me. I don't mean to be in an echo chamber, but where I was going, with what you had just described there is how do we like now knowing this heuristic, if you will, for unlocking human potential in such a way that is scalable, like scaling Mr. Miyagi kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that coach that I had, Garnet Cross, he was, I mean, when I met him, he was 70, he became my best friend for 20 years. He passed actually just a couple of years ago. But he was just this amazing coach. And I remember like just even visiting him on his deathbed, thanking him profusely. And he just kind of laughed at me and was like, he's like, you're thanking me for all these things, but you have no idea how much I learned from you. And one of the things that he shared with me, because as a coach, like I've coached a lot of people. I coach, continue to coach athletes. I continue to coach entrepreneurs, bring them high performance principles to help them succeed at their business. Um, I asked him, what was your secret? How did you unlock all of this in me? Because he didn't just help me on the track. Like he helped me steer through my PhD. We actually, I went to the Canadian Olympic trials in 2012 through his guidance. Um, and that was me, like a walk-on dropout from high school, right? And
Very impressive.
great coaches and mentors. Well, I used to think how impressive of me to achieve those things, but it's nothing. I mean, it was a little to do with me, but it was a lot to do with those people that helped me shape my principles and values. And so, one of the things that Garnett said is secret to coaching, and to bring out success in people, because everybody he touched did amazing. Like he didn't just coach; he coached Ben Johnson. I don't know if you remember him, the 19 when did he win gold? You don't hear about him much anymore because of his medal was redacted for steroid use. He beat Carl Lewis, but they even took him out of the replays of that. They chopped him out. But Ben Johnson, he ran 979 in 84, maybe. Is that right? 88 Seoul. Yeah. He ran 979 back then. It was amazing. It was like almost as impressive a feat compared to the field as Usain Bolt was with his 958. Is like just kind of that gap. So anyway, Garner worked with him. He actually worked with Donovan Bailey, another Canadian sprinter. So whoever he worked with, whoever he touched, gold would follow. So, hey, how did you do that? He said, you really got to want to understand things from another person's point of view. So when your own coaching paradigms get challenged, it's like, well, why? Why don't I understand what this person is presenting, what this paradox is presenting? So when I say you really want to see things from somebody else's point of view, the way I understand that is like we're out and we're looking at the sunset, and I think I got a good view. And you're my friend, and you want me to see the full view. It's like, no, man, come see it from here. And then you look at it, and then your whole life changes. And because you see the sun differently, because you see a person differently. And I think that's, one of the things that I just love about coaching, and DNA is a tool that can help us see people differently and honor their unique gifts. So why don't I pause there and just let you kind of interrogate me?
No, yeah, I think that's really cool, interesting perspective. And like you said, and kind of more on this topic, when a lot of coaches they, have those paradigms challenged, right?
Mm.
It's they get to that point where like, oh, hey, like you don't fit in this box or this box, so I'm just going to label you as a freak, or like you have some of those
Yeah,
things that happen, but you're like, hey, like there's actually something to this because the body's going to have to adapt regardless of whatever you're throwing at it, good or bad, right? So you got to, for me as a coach also too, I also try to take a step back. I'm like, hey, am I doing more harm than good for some of these guys, or is the adaptation that we're going for actually working, right? And obviously the end goal for them on the baseball field is the performance. So that's kind of like my dashboard indicator of like, hey, they're getting better because their performance is better. They're just better in health, better in confidence. So mental health kind of goes along with that too, right? Because they're a lot of their self-worth is in how they perform. Unfortunately, like they can get too deep rooted into that with their identity, and that might be a whole nother topic in and of itself.
Mhm.
But some of my questions I had, obviously, you kind of touched on some of them as far as injuries and other things that you can look into. What exactly do you guys pull from in it? And I'm kind of more asking for the listeners here, but like, is it blood tests or how do you guys quantify some of those things to then be able to kind of boil it down and then put it to more of an applicable way for them to act on, right? Because then you can see all these crazy reports of everything, and baseball is the same way too. That's super advanced now, where they have, all of these biomechanical reports and everything. But where the magic is how you communicate that report to the athlete and how they can actually apply it and make a change, right? Versus just word vomiting and giving them all of that information, and then now they have paralysis of analysis.
100%. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, like, I have not yet productized the work that I'd done with those athletes previously. That being said, I mean, what I can tell you is there's a subset of around 100 markers, that I've classified into, three categories that I spoke to there at the beginning, which is, here's the injury risk, or something that we can use for injury avoidance. Here's a training response as it relates to your exercise physiology, tissue integrity, response to strength training, that kind of stuff. And then from the nutrition side of things, where are your predispositions, predispositions for, you know, fatigue as a result of low vitamin B or stress as a result of your version of the MTHFR gene. Um, so it's a simple saliva sample. I'll just start by saying it's just like a cheek saliva sample. So from your spit, you have cheek cells. And of course, in every single one of your cells, there's a whole library of your DNA. You can now sequence the whole genome for hundreds of dollars, where it used to be billions of dollars. And now with platforms like sequencing.com, that's a company that I currently do consulting for. They have a whole myriad of ways to analyze your DNA. Now, admittedly, it could become paralysis by analysis for a baseball player to go in there.
No doubt.
Because like let me give you a little use case. So I had knee surgery yesterday. It turns out there are a lot of things that I would have loved to know about my genetics. It's foreshadowing, right? The slap tear, the knee thing. It's like, yeah, but that's actually measurable by the specific gene variants that I have that indicate the structural integrity of the kind of collagen that I put down. So I haven't just had a slap tear. I've had both ligaments torn in my hips, medial meniscal tear, yada yada yada. I'm basically I have a monster truck engine on a Chevette chassis, right?
Yeah,
And
that's a good analogy there. Yeah.
and I burn dirty, right? So that means I don't handle complex carbs or refined sugar well, right? Now I've learned that through the process of trial and error. Now the whole thinking here is that can we avoid this error for the future? So that's one of the things I'm really passionate about, rebuilding and, taking a step back and doing some reanalysis on the work that I did with Athletigen previously. So this was work that I did, keep in mind, 2016, right? So we looked at, as I mentioned, thousands of athletes, and we learned uh, that specific injury by communicating a certain injury risk to coaches and athletes, you can actually start to play with things like the training intensity, density, and frequency, right? So take two triple jumpers, and this is a true story. Um, you know, one of them is more vulnerable to Achilles tendon rupture tears, and one isn't. So the one that isn't can seemingly handle more training volume before they start to report on soreness, right? So does that mean the other athlete has to train less? Well, they has to train differently. We got to modify the surfaces. Maybe it's only workouts on the runway track like once, twice a week. Maybe we're doing more work on, stabilization in the sand or in the grass. Maybe we're working on eccentric loading, right? We're definitely much more rigorous when it comes to technique, right? Because it's the minor misstep that's going to result in the rupture. And there are instances then where those athletes, you're proactively putting them on the massage table. It's prehab instead of rehab. And it was often the case that we would put athletes who are vulnerable up next to ones that are not, and the ones that are vulnerable ended up doing better overall in terms of peak performance because it's had to be so in tune with their body. Now that's counterproductive, right? Like, how is it that an injured athlete or an athlete predisposed to injury can come away with a gold medal at the Olympics? And it's like, well, because their coach isn't a drill sergeant, their coach is a gardener,
Love
right?
that. Oh yeah, great analogy there. Absolutely.
And I'll give you
Gardener and
one.
cultivating that, right? Because it's not
Yeah,
just about the plant itself, it's about the dirt it's around, right? Kind of what you alluded to earlier, the people that you were around, the coaches that you had, right?
yeah,
That all is what makes a plant grow or a tree become very, very sturdy and withstand strong storms.
yeah. And, another example is like with the training response genes. So consider like polygenic risk scores. These are becoming more popular in kind of the health literature.
Sure.
Disease. So like multiple markers inform your risk of cardiovascular disease, for example, diabetes, Alzheimer's. That makes sense, right? And remember, we're talking about first principles in biology, right? So you know, if you kind of take our humanity away from things and all the complexities that we bring, there aren't really any Alzheimer genes, and there aren't any, cardiovascular genes, and there aren't any sprint genes, there aren't any sports genes. It's really, um, it's contextualized by what we indicate as importance and as we define our world, so to speak. So the reason I say this, like, obviously there are all those genes, but I'm just saying for the sake of discovering new genes, as it relates to our core interests, what we want to do is we want to remove the paradigm that all genes are involved with disease. Like some certainly are associated with them, but really what we're looking at is a set of circumstances where an organism thrives and or doesn't, and then why, and then we can start to kind of point to reasons in the genes
That's very
and
true. Like they kind of talked about that a lot in some of these documentaries you see on Netflix or any other show of like the blue zones, right? Like, okay, hey, these people are living longer because of whatever environment that they're around or something that it's predisposition from maybe culturally, maybe in North Asia, they eat more rice and they're, having to walk around a lot more versus us in America. We're sitting on the couch and driving everywhere. Two totally different types of lifestyles that could
Mhm.
probably activate those genes a lot
Right.
different.
That's right. So you start to activate. How do you activate genes? You apply stress. What's a good stress? Blue line skates as punishment when hockey players do bad at games. I worked with a lot of NHL hockey players, and one thing I learned from that sport, survival of the fittest,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
There is very rare to find an athlete in the NHL who doesn't respond quick to VO2 max training, high intensity training.
Mhm.
And there are a specific set of genes that have been measured, documented very well, that would suggest combinatorially, as you have these, you're going to adapt that much faster. Like you're going to adapt to VO2 max training in days or, at most weeks. And I learned this working with, probably I'd say 90% of hockey players I worked with were quick adapters for VO2 max training. So what did that mean when I worked with them in the summer? Well, the first thing is they're coming back from playoffs and they're beat up, right? So the first thing is just sort that out. Um, you know, get the rehab, get the, physio, get the osteo, get everything integrated as part of the training, and then start to realign, open up the athlete into, full patterns, so
Mhm.
that they can start to build strength around their sport. Um, and so, that meant, a lot of work, technically on ice, a lot of work on the track, a lot of work in the weight room, just reactivating their posterior chain, right? Like, turning off a lot of their, kind of overactive muscles that are just fired up, which left unchecked are going to lead to like adductor strains and labral tears,
Mhm.
uh, meniscal issues. So it's really just getting the body moving well and effectively and efficiently. But then that they've got to be prepared physiologically for those first weeks of training camp. But what I learned was I didn't need to introduce the VO2 max training until like at most like 3 weeks out of training camp, and that's like all it would take. Just to be cautious, I would do four,
Sure.
um, and then just so I could throw in like a random week at the end in terms of their final preparation. But anyway, the point is that now I saw this, I observed it as a whole product of survival of the fittest. But there was the odd athlete that didn't respond that well, and so they had to have anaerobic training pulsed throughout the summer.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
That makes sense though. And sorry to cut you off, but paralleling this to the baseball pandemic, if you will, of arm injuries, UCL, shoulder, like you said, you had to slap tear yourself, right? Like getting that detailed, because in general, a lot of people have some flack with the return to throw from, hey, whether it's from surgery or even just right after a season, like you were kind of alluding with the hockey player, right? To then it's like, hey, okay, do we completely shut down? Do we slowly ramp back up? Or what a lot of people do is they don't throw for a while and then they have a major spike in workload. And a lot of it is kind of quantified now in the baseball world just based off of workload and the amount of throws. But there's nothing else that really kind of differentiates that,
Yeah.
which I think that's the next cutting edge within the game is and making a difference within all these arm injuries is like, okay, obviously there's a lot of factors, but what else can you find as an indicator for like what you were going to say about that athlete who may need to do different spurts of maybe aerobic training? Well, okay, hey, is that high intensity throwing during the off season where they just kind of, you know, periodically put that in
Yeah.
to keep that
Well,
stimulus and allow that, you know, UCL to stay strong and not get
right,
withered at off
right.
time.
Yeah. Well, and you got to think about like the other contributing factors, like the other tissues, like um I mean, are these guys doing weight training now? Like they're doing a lot more than they used to. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and a lot of times guys is their muscle adaptation um is a lot faster comparatively. So what we just talked about for VO2 max, the same kind of thing that you can see in the gym. Like I just look at weights and put on weight and strength. And so that therefore the injury, right? And you see that really amplified when guys start to use PEDs, because certainly those focus on musculature. And by the way, that's why in track and field, you get the deload. That's where it comes from, right? Is you like the first week is introduction of the work and the program. The second week is build on it. Some coaches will push a third week, but the deload is critical for the tendon ligament lag, and just for the simple reason that you don't get the same amount of blood flow, um, to those regions. But there's so many applications of DNA, which is part of the reason why it becomes so overwhelming. And I think the challenge is where I've looked at DNA in the past is like, okay, you sequence it once and it never changes, and you look at your report and that's it, and that's all you need to know. Well, that's actually not true. If you start to think about it, in terms of like life cycle, like where are you and what's important. So, for example, I mentioned yesterday I had a surgery, and I just got like a pharmacogenetic analysis of my DNA, and I was like, oh, I think that's important to know, given that I'm about to have a meeting with the anesthesiologist and he's about to pump me full of these drugs. Like, let me see like what my DNA says, because they ask those questions. Hey, do you have any drug allergies? Like, I don't know. I haven't tried them all yet, man. Like, how am I supposed to know that? Right? I'm not a recreation drug user. Like, I don't know what these things are. But I know they can kill me. So, it was great because he came in, the anesthesiologist came in, and he's like, "Do you have any drug allergies?" I was like, "Well, none I know, but here's how I respond to these drugs." He looked at it. You changed up my anesthetic profile. You know what else I did is I learned that I adversely respond to Celebrex, something I already knew but forgot,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
Uh, and but then that came out in my DNA, and so guess what? Like that got changed out. So no prescription for Benadryl and or sorry for Celebrex, and then a script for Benadryl, to help in case there are any adverse drug reactions. So to help with the inflammation in that regard. So it was like completely different um, care plan because we
Yeah.
took 5 minutes and looked at my DNA. But that's your point is like, well, how do you make it relevant? Well, the way I was able to make it relevant, again, this is another plug for sequencing.com. They've got this like massive, yeah, full disclosure, I do consulting with them, right? So, but I wouldn't be saying they're great if they weren't. Um, the PGX report, the drug report, it's this massive report. It's like 50 pages. Um, I mean, even if I did have the time to analyze it, and by the way, I've been thinking about DNA for 25 years, so I have that advantage. But even if I did with my brain have the time to actually analyze this report, it's going to take me at least an hour or two, right? And that's being generous, right? That's like if I had nothing else to do that day, actually really would be like more like 4 hours, right? To like really understand it. And it's my own body, so like go figure. Like, wow, that's so complicated. So that's just impractical for even coaches to do for all their athletes. So the beautiful thing now is there's actually an AI associated with this report. So I open the report, the AI is right beside it. I say, tell me what I need to tell my anesthesiologist. And it's like, here are the three things you need to tell your anesthesiologist. And that's how I got to the dialogue. So it's the integration of DNA plus AI, DNA plus environment plus behavior, history, et cetera, plus AI. And you can start to get, to answers more quickly. Now, the danger would be to trust AI completely because it does make mistakes, it does hallucinate. Um, but it definitely provides a great discussion framework and gets us to more beautiful questions, which is I think the future ahead of us is going to be about people discovering the art of asking questions because we're
Mhm.
getting really good at getting answers, right? So it's like, well, you're not going to get anything interesting unless you got a good question, especially with like generative AI coming. So,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's all about, hey, you don't have the answers to everything. It's more of you're changing your perspectives. Very
mm,
similar like what you're talking about the sunlight, right? Like
mm,
just because you're looking at it from this angle and you look at it completely different, you probably see all those memes of like, hey,
mm,
perspective. But
yeah.
it's true because you have to see things from different perspective in order to even know how to ask the right questions.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
what, you
And
know,
it's kind of like it's like the Tao Te Ching and the Oracle and the Book of Changes. So this is like from it's like Far Eastern philosophy, right? Where you basically like um shake sticks or dice and like the East Far East emperors would basically consult the oracles who knew how to read the Book of Changes and basically tell the future. But it really isn't the answer. It's really the question that emerges. So you go through this process and you try to understand. You think you want the answer, but that's not what you want. It's actually it's what, here's a better analogy, more contemporary. It's more the Matrix. And this is what actually the Oracle in the Matrix said to Neo, right? She says, you know, when are you going to figure it out that you've already made the choice? Your job or your challenge now is to understand why, right? So you're going to, you're going to what is it? What, yeah, you're going to the choice you're going to make is going to lead to Trinity's death, and you just have to understand why you made that choice, right?
no, yeah, I love those movies by the way, so I know exactly what you're talking about, and I actually
Well,
have a lot of my posts. It's like, hey, which one are you going to choose? What everyone else does, or
mm,
learn something and do something completely different?
yeah.
Change their own paradigm of what training and playing and performance is actually like,
But
right?
I think that bringing DNA to baseball would be pretty cool,
Absolutely.
um, because like so I worked with track and field athletes, right, where we did the athlete analysis, and the reason I chose that group is because it represented all the athlete diversity from marathon runner to shot putter and everything in between. I look at the baseball field and pitcher is different from a center fielder, is different from a first baseman, is different from a shortstop, is different from a catcher, right? So yeah, I think it'd be really fun to do some like N of one analyses across the baseball diamond. Because I think there's some diamonds in the rough there. I mean, because what you're talking about is career extending insights, right? Like you remember guys like Nolan Ryan. Do you remember him?
Oh yeah,
What the hell
definitely.
was he? What was he doing? Like warming up with the football? Like the guy was so far ahead of it,
So far
right?
ahead of his time. I even have his book where it's like the pitcher's Bible, and it would
Yeah.
just like, hey, black coffee, and then like just his whole regimen. He was obviously one of the first ones to introduce strength training, but it was like the machines, and like if we saw anyone doing that now, you're like, dude, you're like barely lifting any weight, but somehow he knew his body well enough that that's what was gonna help him adapt and get ready to start and obviously throw well into his 40s. So still
Insane.
being able to rip the baseball really hard. But yeah, it's there's a lot of things there where, especially if he's still alive and be like, hey, what are some of your markers compared to maybe
Yeah.
someone else that's coming in? Or here's a wild one, and I don't know if you've heard of this. This is speculation and kind of more rumors. So I don't know this for a fact, but have heard that in Latin America, where they can. Obviously, there's some health things involved in laws, but they're starting to take some of those DNAs and actually see if they have certain markers as far as mental toughness or even, you know, to project and see if they are even worth investing in, which
Yeah.
is, you know,
Yeah.
kind of a little far stretch for me, but I don't know.
No, I had teams reach out to me. I had NFL teams reach out to me to ask me to design assays to not necessarily deselect, um, but in particular the lower end of the draft picks. Like
Mm,
they're there, right? They're in the NFL.
sure.
Uh, but they're like, what about this person is untapped, right? So how
Right.
might I use their DNA to, to optimize the training?
Like your
So
Tom Brady's or the ones that were drafted really low. It's like, hey, maybe through a questionnaire or something that we can find out it's has maybe some more mental fortitude or maybe another marker that they're like, hey, this guy has the ability to go and play for 20 plus years because he can withstand the stress or
yeah.
he has the ability to,
You
you
know
know.
what I'd say? You know what I'd say to the people who are trying to make those tests right now? Um, and I get it, by the way. It's like you got two guys
There's a
and you
lot of
got
money into it. Yeah.
a lot of money going into it. These two guys are identical, and one has a predisposition for a rotator cuff tear and the other doesn't. First of all, you're never going to find that scenario. You're not going to find an all else equals scenario where that's the only thing. So if you're going to bet on that,
Hmm.
here's what I'll say. Um, you seen the movie Seabiscuit? Of
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
course, breaks its leg, and they're gonna put it down, and they're like, you don't throw a whole life away because of a broken leg, right? You're gonna throw a whole talent away because of some genes that you just found out some science on yesterday. Come on.
Yeah. No, it's definitely true.
You're speaking to a molecular biologist, and I'm saying, come on, guys, like get it together. That the human expression is more than genes, and we know this. I remember we're really getting into the movie references today.
I know. I love it. It's great.
I don't watch a lot of movies. They're all old ones I'm citing, right? So that Gattaca with Ethan Hawke, you might have seen that one. That's like there's no gene for the human spirit. That in that movie they were talking about CRISPR-Cas9, basically gene editing, and he wants to be an astronaut, and anyway, he can't be because of his genetics, because of society imposed yada yada yada. So look, there's a lot of like interesting stuff ahead. Like we are, as far as we can tell, a species that's conscious of itself. We think we're the only one. Arguably that there are levels of consciousness out there that exist in other species like dolphins, for example. Like there's intelligence, consciousness, like debatable. Let's say we're the only one. Um, and we think we know how our genes work. Um, we might get to a place with AI to be much more predictive. I don't know if we would be perfectly predictive, um, because the whole nature of evolution requires diversity, i.e., imperfection. Do you know?
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. If it
you,
was all scripted out and there's no stretch.
yeah.
Yes.
You go ahead and you start making superhumans. What you're going to be doing is you're going to start shrinking the diversity and making yourself super vulnerable for some unforeseen event. Like, and then we become the dinosaurs with something much less catastrophic than a meteoroid. Well, say like um, a virus that's much more specific, because you selected for all of these genes, for intelligence, let's just say. But
Mhm.
what piggybacked onto that was some immune vulnerability. So, I think our best bet is always going to be diversity in this, accenting this cosmopolitan nature of our genomes, right? So the genes in us now are coming from everywhere because we're no longer blocked off geographically anymore, like as we might have been 10,000 years ago or less. So anyway, sorry, we got off on a bit of a tangent
Oh,
there,
no,
but
it's great.
I think deselecting athletes based on some of these more nuanced traits, questionable. I think looking at like sudden athlete death syndrome, like that's real. You should look at
Sure.
that. Something that is, I mean, that's a general health concern, though. That's not an athlete concern. I mean, it is concerning for athletes also, but
There's,
it's concerning.
I'd seem like there's a couple more of those, or at least in the public eye, that we're seeing more of.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly what that means, but again, a lot of things that could be included in that and what comes around, football players, for example. The one I can't think of his name right now, but he like died but then came back to life. It's like obviously he's getting hit a lot and there's a lot of other factors that are going into it. Maybe there's those genetic markers that they could have that come up to that, but you never can say, oh, hey, it was because of this one thing, you know.
Mhm.
Then
Yeah.
that's more as I've coached longer and sure you've probably seen the same thing. It's like, hey, it's you got to keep the main thing, but if you only do one thing, you're missing the whole point, right? And having more variability, like you were saying, diversity in the more zoomed out global perspective,
Mhm.
same is true for training, right? You can't be doing the same thing over and over and over again. Definition of insanity, right? But you got to mix it up. You got to be able to have some of those undulating ebbs and flows of maybe it's week to month to overall year to your
Mhm.
career, right? And then really too, you can kind of zoom out. It's like, okay, after the fact, what
Yeah.
happens after these guys are done and they've done all of this stressful stuff through their playing careers, professional or not? How do they optimize their lives going forward? It's a lot more questions that you could have and continue
So,
keep going.
I think what we're going to see is a combination, like for performance sport. I think we're going to see is a combination of genetics as it relates to these, polygenic ready state markers, human performance ready state markers, let's say, to do the things that we've already talked about, avoid injury, find the minimum effective dose of training, and avoid burnout through optimizing nutrition, precision nutrition based on your DNA. I think that's going to be your starting point. But then we're going to start to integrate more of the epigenetics, right? With these different kind of methylation quantification tools that are out there now. So like you can start to detect. Well, I mean, you can see changes in methylation patterns when people exercise. You can see identifiable methylation patterns when people smoke. Um, so I think starting to incorporate regular methylation quantification through the training progression would be pretty neat, right?
Yeah.
Um, so at different phases, like what genes are turned on and off in endurance athletes versus sprinters versus middle distance athletes versus baseball players versus basketball players, et cetera. You just got to get clear again. The beautiful question: what's the question that we're asking? What are we trying to solve for? Like at the end of the day, it's like, hey, let's add. Let's add 5 years to the average lifespan of a pitcher. Cool. Okay, how do we do that? What do we want to start measuring, right? And so I think comes to mind is systemic inflammation, localized inflammation, optimizing technique, bringing together what bears in terms of optimal biomechanics based on the individual's anatomy, and then the structural integrity throughout. Because at the end of the day, I think about baseball. I think about how much. See, now you don't get to call bullshit on me because this really this was done before social media was a thing. But after I learned how to sprint and I was, let's say, 25 pounds heavier, and I learned how to fight and box, and I learned how to use my body differently than I did with baseball. And I got my slap tear corrected just for fun. I went to one of those like throwing cages.
Oh yeah. Did you see at the games and they have the radar? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so again, the radar is probably fake and it's not real, but I still stand by it. I threw 108 miles an hour
Oh, there you go.
once, right? Now,
Youth.
let's just say it was an unconventional warm up, and I only threw one. It's probably not real, but I'm just like I said,
Yeah, no, that's great.
It's faster than any of my friends were throwing, but the point was is I learned like speed of contraction, like
Yeah,
um and how to be precise with speed of contraction.
no contractions. Well, there's definitely some crossover, and I've seen one athlete in the past, Dylan Bundy. I think he's not playing anymore, but he would literally train on a boxing pad for his rotator cuff because of the impact, right?
Yeah,
He was training
yeah,
his body to withstand those impacts, or you think of it like throwing, have a
yeah,
head slamming coming out in a way, and the his body adapted to that.
yeah,
Um, Obviously, a lot of things like very more meticulous, like how the scap moves, right? Like, so if your scap's moving better when you're punching and going
yeah.
for, like, that's good, it's going to correlate to a throw. Uh,
Right.
just timing and the sequencing of everything is going to be a lot different, of course, but
Yeah.
just the overall general parts of that is very, very similar. Right.
Yeah.
Just learning
Yeah.
how to be a better mover, like you said, is that probably gave you light years of, you know,
Yeah.
just being able to do that versus someone who just sits on the couch and then they're like, okay, I'm going to throw it again.
Yeah. 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 It's funny. I learned so much from dance as well, like principles of dance and
Oh,
Pilates, like stop Pilates. As far as I understand this, I've never actually checked this, and I keep saying it, so I should probably check it. But I understand that his principles, like Pilates principles, are actually developed for war veterans who are like injured,
hmm.
like severely injured. Um,
See
But
that.
if you've ever done Pilates, I mean that's like a lot of Bruce Lee stuff, right? It's just yeah, body like pelvic lumbar stability.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, and I used a lot of that with the athletes that I would train and work with, and
It's a
a lot of
very overlooked part of it, right? Like I'll call myself out of like when I first started doing strength training. It's like everything's in the squat, bench, deadlift, or whatever those are. But you got to learn how to move outside of that and
yeah,
be in
yeah,
those awkward positions and learn how to be strong in those awkward positions. Kind of similar to what Pilates does, but
yeah, yeah, and gymnastics and as I said, dance and martial arts. I think there's a danger of being over specialized too soon. You
mhm.
know,
I do agree with that. I think that is very common in the baseball world, where
Mhm.
guys like all they do is really, really super specific stuff, especially from 8 to 10 years old. I think is where it's really brutal, to put bluntly, is all they're doing is hitting and throwing, and they're going on all these tournaments, or you know, and they're not doing anything else, right? You
Mhm.
go throw them a basketball, and you're like, hey, shoot a basketball, and they're like, what?
Mhm.
Like, no, like, like too overly specialized, and they don't even know how to play and be a kid. Kind of
Crazy.
sad. Um, so if they're getting to the point where it's, yeah, overly specialized that early, not a fan. Obviously, everyone's journey is different, like we talked about before, and everyone has a different body.
Yeah.
So maybe they just got to look into sequencing.com and figure out, hey, when's the right time to back off and avoid some of those injuries, right?
Well, there definitely are some athletics reports there that'll point you in the right direction. Um, but if you need help with that analysis, feel free to give me a call because it'll take you a while to figure it out, and I'd rather not. You don't have to spend 4 years on your PhD like I did. We can get on a call and figure some things out in 4 minutes.
Spit it out. Give us a spark notes of what actually matters, right?
Exactly, exactly. Give you what you need today, and but the tools to learn what you're going to need tomorrow. It's an exciting time. I think everybody, with all of the advancements in technology and digital technology and its accessibility, um, we each have a chance to like get a PhD in our own body, and we don't have to do it by banging our heads against the wall and injuring ourselves. And I
Right.
think everybody's worth knowing, man. So, sport and human performance and the DNA of that is the DNA of things is it's what I live for.
DNA of Things, huge plug to your podcast. And you got a lot of awesome episodes. I've actually listened to a couple of them.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going through, and obviously you have more specific topics as far as like longevity. I think that was the one that I was listening to. Um, and a bunch of other ones. So for you guys that are listening, if you want to dive deeper into this, please go check it out. I'll put that link down there in the show notes for you guys as well. Um, but yeah, how long have you been doing the DNA of things, and what I guess trajectory do you see for that, the mission and the reach for that podcast?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been thinking about, um, how that can deliver the most value. And I'll be honest with you. At first, I was like, just do one, right?
Mhm.
Let's see if you can get one podcast out. And like, kudos to you. Like, you're in the 200s, right? Or 300s
It's
or
all consistency, really. It's
sure.
all.
Yeah, but still, you can see the first one was like, oh my God.
It
Talk
was
about
good. It was I'll be honest, yeah, putting out the first one was kind of nerve-wracking.
yeah.
You have no idea how people are going to respond, or hey, is anybody even going to listen to this?
Yeah. Well, sure that there's that, but yeah, there's that, of course. But then there's like, how do I even do it? Right.
Yeah, you just kind of figure it out and
Yeah.
learn
Like
as
any, yeah.
as it's a
Yeah.
platform.
So the first goal is like do one. And then I was like, okay, mission accomplished. I did that. And basically my goal was by the end of first quarter 2024 this year, I do one. So I did that. And I was like, okay, let me see if I can do 13 by the end of Q2. So that meant, can you commit to doing one a week? And so check. And I said, okay, now see if you can do it again in Q3. And as you're doing it again, think about, it's not even think about it, just like ask yourself what it is, right?
Mm.
And right now, what it is me having conversations with people who I think are really cool, who have really cool ideas, and that if somebody heard this conversation, they would gain something that, would change their life. And that's the spirit of it, certainly. And now as I move into like the fourth quarter, I'm like, okay, let me do like a deeper analysis of what this thing is. And I'm, kind of partway through that. But what I think it is, in its essence, the DNA of things is a place where um, I bring together thought leaders in aspects of genetics. Obviously, it's a DNA of things, but also like environment and behavior, and basically how all these things to come together for the expression of human potential, the full unlocking of human potential. And
Ecological. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so I imagine it as something that is useful for people who are just curious about human health and performance. But it's also turning into like a playground for, creators and entrepreneurs in that space to come together. So I imagine it, probably transforming into, retreats, places where instances where thought leaders are gathering, where their principles and values are on display and available for uptake, and so to greatly accelerate the education of understanding ourselves, understanding society, understanding the future of humanity. Because I think I started to go down this rabbit hole earlier in our conversation. Is we're at a place where we're conscious. Hopefully, we're conscientious of who we are, and we might be able to. We can absolutely direct the evolution of our species. Um, Question is, where do we want it to go? And I think that's the greater conversation that I'm having, is like, who do we want to be when we grow up as a species, right? Where are we going? Right? There's all this really cool stuff happening, like interstellar travel. Is that what we're doing? Right? Like we could be anything. What do we want to be?
More and more real each day. You never know.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
I love it. Awesome. Well, Jeremy, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Obviously, plug the podcast, but how else can everybody else that listen get a hold of you and reach out?
Yeah, my so admittedly, my website leaves much to be desired. I've got a rebrand coming, but you can still find me there. Sign up to the newsletter. It's just drjeremykoenig.com. That's my handle for everything. I'm getting better at posting. I'm becoming more of a presence once I figure out what I want to say. But it's on all platforms. drjeremykoenig.com. Find me on LinkedIn under the same name. Um, yeah, that's it.
Love it. Awesome. Well, appreciate you again, Jeremy. And for those of you listening, hope you learned something, got something out of this. Share it if you know someone who needs to hear it, and stay in the zone.
Love it. Thank you.